There are growing signs of a breakthrough in negotiations to end the war between Iran and the U.S. Iran's foreign minister posted on social media platform X that an agreement, quote, has never been closer. In a separate X post, Pakistan's prime minister said a final text of a peace deal had been reached and that both sides were working on the next steps. Now, Donald Trump said negotiators were close to a deal just hours after he called off planned airstrikes on Iran.
Probably have a signing maybe in Europe.
Donald Trump hinted a deal with Iran was imminent during a briefing with reporters in the Oval Office on Thursday.
It'll be soon, maybe this weekend.
And has the Supreme Leader approved this deal, sir?
I understand the answer is yes.
In a telephone town hall later the same day, he went a step further, saying,
I don't know if you heard, but we ended the war with Iran today, and they have agreed never to have a nuclear weapon, something that we insisted on. That was the whole purpose. That was 95% of it. And they've done it in the most powerful way you can do it.
The U.S. president says the deal also includes the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The vital shipping lane has been all but closed since the U.S.-Israel war on Iran started more than 3 months ago. Trump also said Vice President J.D. Vance would attend the signing ceremony, which could take place in Europe as early as this weekend. But in an interview with Iran's state broadcaster, a government spokesperson called reports of an agreement speculative, adding that nothing has been finalized. Later, his boss struck a more optimistic tone. In a social media post on X, Abbas Araghchi wrote, an agreement between the U.S. and Iran has never been closer, and said all details will be shared with the public in due course. Israel, which is not directly involved in the negotiations, is continuing its military operation in Lebanon, striking what it says are Iran-backed Hezbollah targets. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office issued a statement saying he'd spoken to Trump and expressed his appreciation that any final deal with Iran would include restrictions on Tehran's nuclear program.
Right, let's speak to Gordon Robison, journalist and analyst focused on Middle East and foreign affairs. Good to have you with us, Gordon. Now, does this news feel different to you? Does it seem like a more concrete plan than previous attempts?
Well, it feels both the same. It feels like we've been here before. I read something a day or two ago that someone counted 39 times that President Trump had said an agreement was near. So it feels the same, but it also feels different, particularly, I would say, because we are getting positive signs from across the board. So it's not just President Trump telling reporters that an agreement is near. It's the Pakistanis saying it. It's the Iranians saying it. Now, the question is going to be, they all say an agreement is near, but nothing is done until it's done. And I would be a little surprised if Vice President Vance is over here in Europe in the next 48 to 72 hours signing something. But the way things have been going, I wouldn't be astonished.
Now, a lot of this has centered, the war itself centered around Iran's nuclear program. That's been a big issue for both sides. Where would this deal leave that nuclear program?
Well, I think a lot depends on what President Trump is willing to settle for. If you look at the quote from the president that you guys had in your setup piece a moment ago, he said that Iran has agreed never to have a nuclear weapon. Well, Iran has forsworn having a nuclear weapon for decades. That was the policy under both Ayatollah Khomeini and Ayatollah Khamenei. So the Americans, and particularly the president, seem to conveniently ignore that. But what the Americans would say is saying you won't have a nuclear weapon is different from actually doing the things not to have it. And certainly there is a significant portion of the American government that believes that Iran never abandoned its nuclear program. So what we will have to see is what the exact text of the agreement is, if there is an agreement. And I think the real question is, will President Trump settle for a series of promises, including promises Iran has made in the past, because it gets him out of this mess he's gotten himself into? There are people on his right who are urging him not to do that, but it could really go either way.
Hmm. I suppose one other issue is that of the Strait of Hormuz. If that's reopened, what would the implications be for global economy, for Trump as well, politically?
Well, if the strait were open and if it were to stay open and within a week or two get back to the way things used to be in the strait, then that would be a huge benefit to the global economy. And it would be a benefit to the president as well in terms of gas prices, things like that in the United States. They're not just gas, there have been problems with things like fertilizer in the United States because a surprising amount of America's fertilizer comes from copper. So yes, reopening the strait would be a good thing really for the entire world. And I suppose there's a question, one way of putting the question would be, is the United States going to be willing to settle for what an outsider might view as half measures on the nuclear question to get the economic problems of the strait's closure behind him?
Right. According to a U.S. official, the Iran deal includes Lebanon, but Israel has not been part of the negotiations. Do you expect them to adhere to any deal struck between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, I think that's the big question hovering over all of this. I mean, Israel has been a party to the war from day one. So one could argue that if Israel is not a party to the final agreement, then the agreement won't have much behind it. A counter argument to that would be that the United States has a lot of leverage over Israel should it choose to exercise it. And President Trump has certainly shown that he is willing to go toe-to-toe with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu when he wants to. Now, having said that, Netanyahu is a national leader. He has his own interests. There is an argument that Israel has pushed so hard in Lebanon in the last 2 or 3 weeks because it thinks an agreement is close and that it will have to go along with it at least in the near to medium term. I think that is probably the best case scenario, that the Israelis aren't party to the agreement, but they agree to slow down or stop what they're doing in Lebanon, at least for some period of time.
Right. One key part of war and negotiations and things like that is propaganda. But that aside, in their heart of hearts, who do you think comes out of these negotiations the happier?
Well, I think we'll have to see what the final text is. One of the things that has taken so long to get here, assuming we are at the last stage, is that both sides have been insisting that they get something that they could clearly define as a win vis-a-vis the other. The Americans don't want the Iranians to be able to say that they had a victory, and the Iranians don't want the Americans to say that they won any points. So if they've found some way to a form of words that leaves both sides reasonably happy, not completely happy, but reasonably happy, then we might get there. But like I said at the beginning of our conversation, it seems like we're getting really close, but we've been here before, and I think we can't assume anything's done till it's done.
Gordon Robison, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for those insights.
Pleasure.
All right, let's pick through this then with Andrew Gawthorpe, who's a specialist in US politics and foreign policy at Leiden University in the Netherlands. He's also responsible for the America Explained podcast and Substack. Welcome to DW. So we have Donald Trump, Iran's foreign minister, and the Prime Minister of Mediators, Pakistan, all saying in their own ways that things are looking hopeful. How hopeful are you?
Well, Phil, thanks for having me on the show. And I think that this is the closest we appear to have been to an agreement since the ceasefire was first announced a couple of months ago. But I think there's also still two things to remember. So one is that we have been very close before, only to have things fall through at the last minute. And ongoing fighting in Lebanon is, for instance, an issue that could still derail this process before an agreement is signed, which supposedly will happen in Europe this weekend. But I think also the broader reason I have to not be too hopeful is that even in the most optimistic rendering of what has been agreed as part of this deal, most of the thorny issues have been kicked way down the road to deal with. That this isn't actually a resolution of the key issues on the nuclear program or the Strait of Hormuz that really divide the two sides. These are just talks about further talking right now. So it would be great and it would be a step in the right direction if something materializes this weekend, but I don't think we should imagine that it's the end of the process yet.
Right. The process, as you've alluded to there, the current process is about stopping the fighting, getting a framework deal that would then be talked about, discussed, negotiated over for the next, I don't know, months and years. So what do you think, who do you think has moved? Who has blinked? How have we got at least this far? Because the issues looked intractable. Nuclear enrichment, the Strait of Hormuz, sanctions relief, Lebanon, those all looked like yes, no issues.
Well, one of the great difficulties that we still have in answering that question is that both sides describe what's in this deal extremely differently. So we're hearing one version of what's in it from the White House right now, and we're hearing a completely different version from the Iranian side. That's something that actually happened with the initial ceasefire agreement 2 months ago as well. One of the principles of that ceasefire was supposed to be that the Strait of Hormuz would be reopened, and that it famously has not happened. So it's hard at this point to see who has blinked, to be honest. And I think that what will be more important than the precise way that the two sides characterize the deal is what happens in the days and weeks after that. If we do start to see some opening of the strait, if we do start to see some sanctions relief for the Iranians, if we see fighting in Lebanon stop, which of course is something that Israel has influence over as well, Iran sees Lebanon as an integral part of this picture. It wants peace there. And it's not entirely within the gift of the American government to deliver that, because Israel gets a voice too. So there's great confusion tonight, to be honest, about what exactly has been agreed to and what its long-term implications would be. But I would personally place a bet on continued contention, to put it that way, and I would not rule out further strikes and fighting like we've seen this week either.
Talk to us more then about Israel's role in all of this, because of course Israel not at the negotiating table, Israel considering itself not to be bound by anything that is agreed, and as you say, Iran very much of the opinion that Lebanon is part of this deal, whereas Israel is looking to extend this, to solidify this buffer zone in southern Lebanon. So what's the Israeli position on all this?
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is in an incredibly difficult position politically because he can't be seen to be basically giving the United States a veto over Israeli security. That's impossible for him in terms of domestic politics. So he needs to continue, or he feels the need rather, to continue to assert independence of action, to show that he's acting to defend Israeli interests as he sees them in Lebanon. And the United States has some influence over what Israel does. It did manage so earlier this week to stop Israel carrying out a new wave of strikes against Iran by basically, as far as I understand, threatening not to protect Israel from the Iranian retaliation. But in terms of Lebanon, the U.S. can't dictate everything that Israel does. And I think Netanyahu will work very hard to try to undermine this deal, to try to stop it from taking effect, because he realizes now that Trump just wants this war to be over. He doesn't, I think, care as much anymore about Iran's nuclear program. He needs peace. He needs the economy to be growing again. Whereas Netanyahu views these issues as existential for Israel's security. Right. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Andrew Gawthorpe from Leiden University.
Thank you.